Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andrea Tantillo with the Houston-Galveston Area Council, and I'm going to go over some general housekeeping items before we get started. First, the meeting is being recorded. Microphones will be muted throughout the presentation, and if you're on the phone and unmuted, please mute your phone. We will have a brief question and answer period for our presenters after each one. Please use the raise your hand function or type your questions in the question box in the control panel. You can also type your questions in that question box if you're having technical difficulties or have a question for H-GAC staff. We may not be able to have time for the round-robin roundtable during this meeting, but if we don't and you have something coming up that you want everyone to know about, please put that in the question box or send me an email and I'll send it out with the meeting follow-up. And now with that, I'll turn control of the meeting over to Glenn Laird to start this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I want to welcome everyone who is here so far. We've got 22, 23 people, I believe, that are currently plugged in. I just wanted to welcome everybody and let you know what the agenda is for the day. And as you can see in front of you, we're going to, once we get around to having everybody introduced, then Ashley Jones with More Archaeological is going to be making a presentation. And then after that, Dr. Chris Orlea, who is with the Pearland Parks and Recreation Department, will also be making a presentation. Then we're going to have a bit of a discussion about the Parks and Natural Areas Awards for this year. And there will be, we have several changes that we've been talking among ourselves over that we want to put out in front of the group, the whole round table, to get feedback so that we can complete putting together the final package that's going to go out when that time comes, which is getting fairly soon. And so, having said that, I think what we need to do now is do the roll call. If we were all together in a room, I'd just point to somebody at some point and say, you start, and we go all the way around the circle until everybody has introduced themselves and said who they're representing. So in this case, I'm going to turn back to Andrea to basically do the roll call of everybody that's here so that you can unmute and say who you're here representing or anything like that. And we'll go around just as quickly as we can. So back to you, Andrea.
Okay, the easiest way I think to do this will be I will call your name and unmute you, and then you can tell us again your name and thank you, Mr. Heppen, and who you're representing. First, we'll start with our staff. Wendy Almanzon.
Hi, this is Wendy. I'm here.
Thank you. Drew Gutierrez. Casey Collins.
I'm here.
Casey, who are you with? Cheryl Murgo.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Cheryl with H-GAC.
Thank you. Cullen Andrasik.
Hi, Dylan Andrasik. I'm with the City of Pearland.
Thank you. Dan Kalinsky.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. I'm here. City of Allen.
Thank you. Casey Collins is with Half and Associates. I think I have him double muted. Eric Heppen is with Harris County Precinct 3. Fung Lin Du. Frank Weary.
Yeah, this is Frank Weary. I'm with Exploration Green Conservancy.
Thank you. Jim Robertson. Joe Chesser.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Kevin Carter.
Good afternoon. Yes, Kevin Carter with City of Pearland.
Thank you. Lisa Marshall. Michael Burku.
Mike Burkew, Houston One Boys.
Thank you. Michelle Shen.
Hi, this is Michelle Shen with Interstate Mud.
Thank you. Rose Estevez.
From the Houston Parks and Recreation Department.
Thank you. Sylvester Reeder. Tracy Tipanero.
Hi, this is Tracy Timpanero from Rick Rice Park in Katy, Texas.
Thank you. And Brian Moran. We also had Becky Martinez join us. And Annabeth Tusurios, maybe? And that looks like everybody, Glenn, including, well, not our speakers, but they're going to come on in just a moment. So I'll hand it back to you, Glenn.
Okay. Any rate, as you can see from the agenda, we're going to move to hear from Ashley Jones with more archaeological consulting. She's going to be talking about park development and cultural resources. Take it away, Ashley.
Ashley, you're still muted.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Andrea. So let's see. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ashley Jones. I'm a principal investigator and project manager with More Archaeological Consulting, and I'm very excited to speak with you this afternoon. As you can guess, archaeologists deal with old things in the past, so we're not always great with technology, so please bear with me if I have any issues. Luckily, I'm married to a tech support expert, and he's often bailing me out of pickles I put myself in. So today I'm going to talk about cultural resource management and park development, and I'm going to first talk about what is cultural resource management anyway, and what is archaeology, and how this relates to park development in Texas. So just so everybody's on the same page, I provided two definitions. So archaeology, of course, is the scientific study of the human past through the analysis of material remains. And material remains are basically the things that people leave behind. We study a lot of garbage that people have left behind. You know, I'm right now looking at little glass shards. In the United States, it's a subfield of anthropology. And sometimes you'll hear archaeologists tell you if they're an expert in prehistoric or historic archaeology, and they're just telling you the time periods that they're interested in studying. I work in the field of cultural resource management. This stems from the idea that there's cultural resources in the United States that need to be managed. And usually they're managed at a time when they're going to be potentially impacted. The proper management of these resources is regulated by government policies and guidelines. So what are cultural resources anyway? What are these things that we're managing? The 6 categories you see before you are guidelines, are usually where we start. So structures that are 50 years old or older, historic sites and features, that's a sawmill foundation, cemeteries, prehistoric sites and features, that's Mound B at Caddo Mound State Historic Site, artifacts, some artifacts are so rare that they alone are important historic resources, like those Clovis points, and then documents. The Declaration of Independence is very important to us as a nation. This is an important cultural resource. There we go. Okay, so the earliest archaeological studies focused on looking at resources that were vanishing. So for example, in 1848, the Smithsonian Institution was very interested in the mound builders. So if you look at the uppermost photo in this slide, that's Monk's Mound at Cahokia, which is a state park in Illinois. So the early archaeologists are out trying to document these sites. They're shipping massive amounts of materials back to the Smithsonian and various institutions on the East Coast to document all of these things. Other sites that were considered vanishing by the 1900s were Civil War sites. And so this really spurred the development of cultural resource laws to protect these resources. So one of the earliest laws is the 1906 Antiquities Act, or Antiquities Preservation Act. And then another important one was the development of the national parks, which created a place where people could go and visit these resources that were considered of national importance. And now, of course, today we have parks at the national and state level where you can go see these historic resources. So not everything is as monumental as perhaps Monk's Mound or Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon, but we also have the Club Woods Nature Preserve up in Tomball, and this is the original family house, and Presidio San Sabat in Maynard, Texas. So cultural laws and resource laws and regulations are designed to provide procedures and assessments for assessing these resources as you encounter them. They outline the responsibilities of each party involved. They also tell you if you need to approach stakeholders and get community input on your project and how they might affect cultural resources. They guide the creation of the appropriate documentation. What sort of technical reports are going to be generated outlining these resources? But more importantly, they give a set of criteria that's going to determine the significance of the site. At the federal level, this is a set of criteria telling you if the cultural resource that's on a property is eligible for inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places, or at the state level, is it eligible to be a state antiquities landmark? What's the significance of this cultural resource for further understanding of a time period, an architectural style, something significant to understanding Texas or the United States? So at the federal level, the law that typically guides cultural resources is the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. You're going to hear archaeologists talk about Section 106 when they're talking about how cultural resource studies are going to meet this law. It is basically asking what sort of impact is an undertaking going to have on a historic or archaeological resource that has the potential, that that may be eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. So that's the criteria that you're trying to meet when you're studying a given cultural resource on a property. At the state level, we have the Antiquities Code of Texas of 1969, and this does a couple of very important things in the state. One, it establishes our regulatory body, the Texas Historical Commission, and it created the State Historic Preservation Officer who interacts with our Section 106 cultural resource reviews. It references projects that are constructed on land owned by a political entity of the state or projects sponsored by a political subdivision of the state. It is looking at what are the impacts of an undertaking by a political subdivision on state cultural resources, both onshore and slightly offshore. This law is unique in that it was really spurred into being by the loss of shipwrecks that were near shore and onshore, and the state of Texas not finding that loss or that loss was unacceptable, losing that important data on shipwrecks. So for example, if I'm going to be working on a cultural resource project that is an undertaking by a political subdivision, I'm going to be pulling an antiquities permit through the Texas Historical Commission. I'm going to be doing consultation with that agency and working with them to understand the cultural resources on a given property. So once again, these are just rules of thumb. This is a good place to start when you're thinking through if your project might be subject to a federal or state level antiquities law. So typically projects that are funded in whole or part under a federal or state agency, so thinking grants, awards, or matching funds, could be subject to review under NHPA or the Act. So I know a lot of parks are getting funding through Texas Parks and Wildlife grants. So local parks grant, recreational trails grants, these all require that environmental due diligence occurs, and part of that environmental due diligence is cultural resources. And we'll go and talk about what that can look like in another slide or two. Projects requiring a federal permit, license, or approval. So think about any of the Army Corps of Engineers permits that are required for impacting a waterway. Those are all going to be subject to due diligence, cultural resources studies under the National Historic Preservation Act. And then projects subject to state and or local regulations. So an example of this is actually here in Houston. The city of Houston does have some city recognized landmarks. And if those are going to be impacted, that would go under review through the city of Houston's Archaeological and Historical Commission. So cultural resource studies can have several phases to them. We usually like to start during the planning stages of a project. So when a project is being planned, when the route is known, when the footprint of a structure is known, or even when a piece of real estate has been identified. And we usually start with a background review where we look at the environmental history of a property. We look at the history of the property. We look through databases to see what cultural resources may be present on that property. And we start to assess the potential that cultural resources could be encountered on that property, or if known eligible resources are on that property. If it was found that there is a potential to encounter cultural resources, then we may move on to a phase 1 pedestrian survey. And so on the right side, the guy who's holding the glass bottle and the lady who's digging, that's a shovel test excavation. It's a small excavation. And this is where we start to look and see if there's cultural resources on a property. And it's a very systematic investigation. If cultural resources are found and they're found to have the potential to be eligible, or an unknown eligibility, but it's questioned, it may move on to phase 2 eligibility testing. And this is where things look a little more like the archaeology you may be familiar with, where we're opening up units like you see below, and we're starting to really recover a lot of data. And the whole purpose of this is to determine if this site is eligible for listing on the National Register. So if it is, and there is no way that the project cannot impact this eligible resource, then we might move on to phase 3 mitigation data recovery. And this is where a variety of things may happen, like open block excavations, where we're recovering a lot of data to really learn as much about the site as we possibly can, education and public outreach. A variety of things might happen during the mitigation of the archaeological site. But a typical archaeological survey, linear or area or otherwise, typically starts with background research and then moves on to a pedestrian survey, which can be a surface survey, excavation of those little shovel tests, or in deep Holocene soils. Here in Houston, it might include some backhoe trenching. So let's quickly look at one of Matt's previous surveys at a park and talk about the intersection of cultural resource survey to meet the needs of the grant. And then I just want to present quickly on a public outreach project that we're doing at a different park here in Harris County. So Cullinan Park sits on 750 acres along Oyster Creek. And there's these 2 lakes within the park, White Lake and a portion of Pumpkin Lake. City of Houston Park and Recreation Department received funding from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Grant to acquire and develop parklands. And of course, a component of this grant is to do archaeological investigations to try to identify any cultural resources that may be present, and then to assess whether they could be eligible as state antiquities landmark or listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So this project, the first phase, happened in 1991. And while this is an old project, it's a really important project in that it moved through all 3 phases of archaeological investigation, which is incredibly rare. And it provided a wealth of data on prehistoric and historic occupations in Southeast Texas. So let's move on to the next page. So the first thing that archaeologists with MAC did is they conducted some background research on the property. This figure, I want to let everybody know, north is currently pointing to the left, so you just want to mentally flip it in your head. So Hodges Cemetery is sitting next to White Lake, and they knew from archival documentation that the Hodges homestead had been mapped off of the park site on what is now the airport, but it was likely down along the bend of Oyster Creek. Some other archival documentation had indicated it was further down. You can see the park contains part of the Alexander Hodge League. He received his in 1828 as part of the Old 300 family settlements through Austin's Colony and the M.M. Battle League. The other thing that was mapped out was these high probability areas for encountering cultural materials. Waterways are very important to prehistoric peoples of Southeast Texas, and a geoarchaeologist came out and assessed some of the potential landforms where cultural resources may be encountered. So archaeologists then came out and they did shovel testing, and they did encounter several archaeological sites, 3 of which they thought may have the potential to have more data and high research potential, so to be a little more significant than some of the other sites in the area. So these 3 sites moved on to testing. One of the sites that moved on to testing is 41 FB202. It was a concentration of low-fired bricks and other 19th century artifacts. They did find a little segment of brick that still had mortar intact, which suggests either wall fall or some sort of pavement or maybe even a fireplace. The majority of the historic artifacts were found in Cullinan Park were found at this site, either on the surface or shallowly buried. So they went back and looked through documentary evidence and found that the Hodge descendants were living on small farms in the area. They were growing corn and other goods. And so this could possibly be related to Hodge family occupation. The next site that I'm going to briefly cover is 41 FB 200. This site could not be avoided by park development, so ended up moving on to data recovery. This is a very interesting prehistoric site. It contained a wealth of data that you don't normally get in archaeological sites in this area. This includes organic remains. So organic remains don't always preserve well in the archaeological record. These are usually the first things that you lose. So the faunal data, the projectile points, the shell beads, hearth, all provided critical information about prehistoric residential occupations in Southeast Texas during the late ceramic and late prehistoric time periods. So this is considered a residential base camp. Once again, a very rare site to find in Southeast Texas. There was evidence of bioturbation at the site, which had probably wrecked some of the stratigraphy, but there's still a wealth of data which made a recommendation of eligibility for listing for this site. All right, I'm going to try to go through this next one quickly so we have some time for questions. Currently, the Houston Archaeological Society, Harris County Precinct 3, and More Archaeological Consulting is putting together a public outreach program at Club Woods Nature Center, which is near Tomball. These two maps show the Nature Center as it was when it was a farmstead in 1944 and how it is today in 2017. And you can see that it is covered in dense vegetation. So the house on the property was built in 1896 by the Club family, and H-GAC and the Club Woods Nature Center has been working on building this program since 2017. It's focused on bringing families and children to the park, teaching them about archaeology, the history of Northwest Harris County, the history of German immigrants and farmsteads in the area, and a little bit on best archaeological practices. And we're really trying to bring the community members into the park, bring Houston Archaeological Society members into the park and engage them in some hands-on history. One of the cool things that we've done is we're not just focusing on excavation, but we're also focusing on some remote sensing techniques. So one of the things we did is we took that 1944 aerial, overlaid it, and mapped out where we saw some of the old buildings. We put in some ground penetrating radar grids just to make sure it's going to work. So that's grid 1, and that's us doing it. And we did identify some anomalies. So we do want to get back out there when it's safe and continue doing these non-invasive technologies, using them to engage the community and bring them into the park. So thank you very much for letting me speak with you today. I had a great time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Lynn, we do have time for questions. If people would like to raise their hand to ask a question, I'll unmute you, or you can type your question in the question box. Actually, we can still see your screen, and so that's your background, which is actually pretty cool. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand or type them in the question box. Hi, Feng Lin Du.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes. Hi, actually, this is Feng Lin from City of Sugarland. It's great to hear your presentation. Thank you so much. I just have a few questions. First, on your slide number 12, you had the letters on the Colony Park map. It says HCP. What do they stand for?
Those were potential locations of historic material.
Okay. We, we City of Sugar Land Parks and Recreation is, maintaining this park. So if we have anything like, like a geotechnical boring or some kind of like development, how far away we shall stay away from those points? I mean, those are points on the map, but generally, I have seen, like Texas Archaeological Sites Atlas, those red triangles. We just don't, there are a bunch of triangles in on the Colony Park map, but we don't know how far away we should stay away from them.
That's a good question. It depends on the site. So typically when we go out and delineate a site, we try to put a 40-meter buffer around them. So that's going to be about 10 to 20 feet to try to cap that site. So you know where there's cultural material and where there's not. The problem with the Sites Atlas is it doesn't always show you where the boundaries of the sites are. It usually just shows you the center point. So that's one thing where you can contact an archaeologist or even contact the Texas Historical Commission, and they'll tell you where you need to, or how far away from that center point you need to be to avoid impacting the site.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful. My other question is, you mentioned about this study in 1991. The park used to be managed by City of Houston, and then now we are doing that. Is there any way that we can get that document?
Sure.
From the studies?
Yeah, do you want to just send me your email address and I'll email you a copy of the report?
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. That's all my questions. Thank you.
There's a question in the question box. It says, for the Club Woods work, you all measure interaction somehow? This is from Becky Martinez. She said, I brought my kiddo and it was really cool. I was wondering how many people have participated.
So one year we counted, so Becky came to the Digging Old Stuff event, which happens every October. I don't know that it's going to happen this year, but this is a history-focused event at Club Woods. Let's see, we counted 300 children who came through our hands-on area. And we have 3 different components to the hands-on area. We have an entrance, which has artifacts that have been donated, where the children do hands-on activities. We talk about the artifacts. There's a little corn grinding area. So it's very hands-on, hands-based interactions and learning. Then we have an excavation area with artifacts, or with archaeologists and avocational archaeologists, allowing the children to excavate in units and then screen the dirt. And then there's a third station where they're watching donated artifacts. So they're experiencing each segment of a cultural resource investigation. What we usually find in the excavation area is the parents get equally as excited as the children, and we usually have more parents in the units than children. But it's a really good event, and we always see a lot of people come through it. But I hope in next year's we can actually do some counts and see who all we're reaching. In one-on-one conversations with the people coming through, we're getting a lot of Northwest Harris County residents coming into the park, in some cases for the first time.
Ashley, could you please show your contact information slide again?
Oh, sure. There we go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think Roger, who founded the firm, is on the phone maybe. So I've included his email as well.
If anyone has any more questions, you can raise your hand or type them in the question box. Or I bet you can email Ashley later if you think of something you want to know.
I'm happy to answer any questions. Feel free to email me. I'm pretty much tethered to my computer nowadays now that we're working from home. And I'm also not out in the field today, so.
It's always a little weird online while we wait for someone to type something or raise their hand or unmute themselves and we're just silent. I don't see any more questions or any more raised hands. So if we want to move on with the program, we can return it to Glenn. How does that sound?
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. All right. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to hear from Dr. Chris Orlea from the city of Pearland, and you will see him there. He'll be talking to us about park operations and, quote, this dynamic new environment that we are finding ourselves in. Okay, so Doc, take it away.
All right, Andrea, could I double check with you that I've got the correct screen up and that you can hear me all right?
I can see your whole screen, so I don't know what you're going to present, but I can hear you just fine. So
perfect. So where my cursor is moving is what you guys see?
I can see the PowerPoint, the PowerPoint program.
Well, that's not the right one. Let's make sure we got the right screen on there. Okay, screen 2. There we go.
There we go. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Andrea, so much for inviting me and Glenn as well to speak before this subcommittee and share about all of our favorite topic, the pandemic. That's where we find ourselves. Before I go any further, just wanted to point out the title I put on this, and I would love for as many of you to share this as possible. I think when we, as a society, we do our best to normalize things, and I don't think this is something we should normalize. So I've done my best with my team to share that this is not going to be our new normal, because that's going to let us get a little complacent. So it's new, but it is certainly not normal. There's nothing normal about what's going on here. So throughout this, I'll share a couple resources. If you are to look, I'm hovering in my mouse here, the City of Pearland's logo in the lower right of your screen is hyperlinked to the city's page. What I'm going to do, in addition to what I've already shared with Andrea that's going to be available to all of you, my hope is that for agencies that maybe right now, because of the pandemic itself, or just because of the natural structure of your agency, there's not really the bandwidth to come out with the documentation, the plans, the signage that you may need in this interim as we interact with the pandemic. I would like you to be able to at least borrow from the documentation that we've seen success with, but I would ask that when you guys are taking any of the documents that's been that's gone out through Andrea or that you pull from this presentation, you remove the City of Pearland's logo and any reference to our agency and just replace it with yours. But once it's identified as yours as the agency, that's all we're asking is just the agency name changed. It's completely free of copyright and yours to use. So I will move right into my presentation. A little bit about me. If we would like to advance here, I would really like to. There we go. Okay, so I think my Twitter bio does a pretty good job of summing me up in a nutshell. It's a dad, husband, Christian, public servant, PhD, and nerd. And I share that out and saying that's in no particular order. And that's my family you see there. My wife, Melinda, and my son, Ryder, we're native Texans. And there's a little bit about my academic history below. I only want to share that to let you know that as the parks director, sometimes we get our reputation as professional kickballers, but I want to share there is a little bit of academic studying behind this, so we can temper that with the fun side. So, and I do appreciate the introduction, Mr. Laird, as doctor, but you guys, if you need to reach out to me or anything, feel free to just call me Chris. Quite proud of the accomplishment, but it does feel a little strange sometimes. So on the right is just a list of accomplishments that I've had. Next, sharing a little bit about my agency as it is, the City of Pearland. If my computer would like to go there. There we are. So including our extraterritorial jurisdiction as of 2019, there was a little over 155,000. And I thought something important to point out now and during the presentation was that as Houston succeeded New York as the most diverse metropolitan area in the nation, within the metro area of Houston, two agencies stood out. That was Missouri City and the City of Pearland. Since that study has came out, the City of Pearland has been able to rise to the top as a racially and ethnically diverse city. Within that, you have there's a requirement on you to tailor some of these responses to everything we do programmatically day in and day out. But in a pandemic situation, that's something to point out as well. So I hope within these documents and scenarios that you see, you're able to recognize some of the bandwidth and breadth of what I'm going to share. So there's a list of some of our parks available, and within our system, we also have a recreation center and natatorium, the West Side Event Center, NAP Activity Center, which is for active adults 55 and older. The mean age within the facility is about 74. The Dolores Fenwick Nature Center, the sports complex at Shadow Creek Ranch, Hickory Slough Sportsplex, and about 62 miles of trails. So there's a pretty diverse set of assets being shared with our community through service delivery that we're taking into consideration as we operate in what I tried to whitewash a bit and call a dynamic environment. I think dynamic is probably the nicest thing it's been called. So getting right into the brass tacks of where we're at, to be or not to be open, what do you do? We have an obligation, many of us through endowments, through tax rolls. For one way or another, there's an obligation to those that we serve to be open. But when does our need to be open become outweighed by our obligation to keep people safe? So I put together a list of considerations that we've used within our agency to really address how we respond, and that is through service delivery as an open or suspended facility to the COVID-19 pandemic. So initially, the prevailing words of the day and law at the end of the day are going to be orders and regulations. I also like to look at what the local impact is going to be. If you have a need to cease operation of perhaps there's a singular facility that you may be operating, take into consideration if that facility may require some type of an annual maintenance, because what we're finding is that there are many contractors that are out of work at the moment. And if the local impact of your facility closing is large, maybe you could change that annual closure and take care of that at an earlier date during these times when closure is more appropriate. Operational flexibility is incredibly important during opening or closure of your green space and facilities, just because anything in black and white is likely to fail. as we have seen orders change grossly from an 8 a.m. briefing into a 5 p.m. briefing. So your ability to be flexible is going to be the cornerstone of your ability to continue operate or successfully cease your operation. Something else that we like to consider is the likelihood of compliance. And if you find that to be low, where is your ability to enforce? The likelihood of compliance and ability to enforce lend themselves right into the wheelhouse of marketing and through educating your public on what you're doing. So if you will humor me, we started through the city's YouTube channel, which has a fairly large constituency of subscribers, but we have a much larger social media audience, and the link to those YouTubes was sent out. So what I'm going to play now is a video that we initially aired in April, just to get people used to the sentiment before we understood some of the length and breadth of the COVID-19 pandemic, and get them accustomed to the idea that there may be closures throughout. So I'm going to try to play this here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Chris Orlia, Director of the City of Pearland's Parks and Recreation Department, and this is your April 29th COVID-19 update. Over the past several days, our department and city have updated guidelines for those visiting city parks within Pearland, based on evolving guidance from the state and federal health partners. As we strive to continue to keep our community safe and reopen in a responsible manner, guidelines from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, as well as the Texas Department of State Health Services, DSHS, have all been the basis of our direction. Social distancing remains our most effective tool in the fight against the COVID-19 illness. In a press conference held on April 17th, Governor Abbott announced plans to reopen many things, among them our parks. Some of these guidelines, like wearing a mask while out in public and limiting group sizes, are recommendations that also help fight against the COVID-19 illness. We've posted these guidelines to align our efforts with those of the governor's office. In addition to updating park guidelines, our team has collectively been working on updating facility openings, camps, and summer programming over the past several weeks. Regarding the timeline of our facilities reopening, we're keeping the safety of the community paramount. And with that will come a staggered schedule over the next several weeks of opening up to the public. In early June, we plan to reopen the Dolores Fenwick Nature Center in alignment with occupancy limits set by the Office of the Governor. In late June, we plan to open the Recreation Center and will only operate the weight and cardio areas, the track, as well as the gym. There will be no group fitness, childcare, or basketball for the time being after reopening. The natatorium will remain closed during this time. We will continue to keep you informed of any updates with facilities opening. Again, please visit pearlandtx.gov/coronavirus to keep track of all details related to the facilities.
Okay, so that was our initial foray into public messaging. What we found is that when an individual is informed, they are far more likely to comply with what it is that you're asking of them. So what you saw in there were our first steps in laying the framework that we are making decisions that affect our community, but those decisions aren't made in a vacuum. Those decisions are made through consultation with the agencies that we mentioned, and also that the decisions that we make are going to be dynamic decisions, and that they may ebb and flow with case counts. I wanted to show that particularly so that I could readdress the point in this video that we filmed just in late April and anticipated opening in late June of a recreation center facility within our community. We were actually able to expedite that opening to May 29th based on cessation and the case counts. We have since figured out that the case count numbers were a bit lower because we were doing a very good job in the meantime of our social distancing, of wearing masks, of doing what we were supposed to. I think there has been some hindsight now that perhaps we got ahead of ourselves as a state in reopening, and we find ourselves again in a situation where the Houston Metro is under the microscope, I suppose, no pun intended, with some of our federal agencies. And in response to that, publications went out Friday, and as of today, Several indoor facilities are closed to public visitors, as well as outdoor facilities, doubling down and reinvesting in our efforts to social distance and to wear proper PPE when on site. So what do you need to consider when you're in these types of situations? Something important for me to consider when I'm in those types of situations is who is going to be affected by this? Who is going to have something to win or lose in doing this? And in these situations, there's always going to be a constituency that's put out or displaced from their routine. I found it to be paramount to be totally transparent in that we take our active membership that either visit our parks through some type of program that we can collect a roster, or some type of program that we can collect a roster, and we ask our administrative staff to simply start calling people and say, this is what we think is about to happen. We want to get you ready for it, and we want to hear what we could do that's within this finite set of regulations that might meet your needs in the interim. That has been tremendously useful during that time. So the reopening video is another reopening. If you have any indoor type facilities or any facilities within your green space or open space that has the same regulations that would adhere to indoor facilities, I'm particularly proud of the work that our communications team put together on that video, just because it has very detailed recommendations, guidelines, requirements that scan the gambit and let people know what to expect when they get there. It is very detail oriented and very transparent, again, like I had mentioned earlier. So temporary policy changes, I thought it was very on the nose and very appropriate to begin that one with a statement of looking to a higher power. And I mean that in all senses of the term and in how we've been lately. But in a pointed way of saying that, what I mean is, who can make those demands in your jurisdiction? It's important to know if you're not the government agency within your city, you happen to be a nonprofit or a conservancy, that you know whether you're a home rule or a general law city, because that'll greatly affect what you can do. Most organizations are home rule, which means that you'll have opportunities under the state's constitution that will allow you to see exactly how far your enforcement abilities can go. An example within the community of Pearland, in addition to Governor Abbott's executive orders, Mayor Tom Reed issued executive orders under his own authority, which gave additional layers of enforcement. As many of you may have discovered by this point, often at the most inopportune time, is that many or most of the executive orders that have came out of the governor's office are ended with a very small script that essentially lets the reader know that no one is actually allowed to enforce that order. So that can make enforcement difficult. So that's, again, where education comes in to cause people to want to comply, not have to comply. So that's an important area to know your minimum or maximum enforceability within those areas. So another temporary policy change that you'll need to look at outside of general ordinances and law would be standard sanitizing your equipment and other types of needs. That would include restrooms, benches, play areas, indoor facilities. And what you may be surprised to find is outside of the pandemic scenario, there were very few agencies, not within the medical community, that were aware of the number of firms in the greater Houston area that are capable of doing this. So what you may want to do is look out for partnerships, see where you may be able to garner some wins within your community through that. So do you have any of those professional firms in your community that can meet the sanitizing needs of your agency at that time? It listed here under general information, just as a reminder, so that as I was about halfway through, I could hit on the high points of this. There are several videos that are available, as I mentioned, as well as a social media toolkit, several pieces of print. And in the print, it was important for me to share with you all every piece of print that has been shared through a public facility is translated into our 5 major languages. That's English, Spanish, Tagalog, Mandarin, and Vietnamese. We do have additional abilities to translate that into Hindi, as well as we're working through right now to make sure all of our messages are easily conveyed to the deaf or hard of hearing community through either ASL videos, or when the ability is not there to make that happen, the next best thing we can do is closed captioning. We understand a closed caption is not a universal second language to ASL, but it is a stopgap in where we're recognizing that something so important to share throughout your community needs to be met on the ears where they are. All of this, again, is going to be available from H-GAC, and it's a good time, I think, to just reiterate, Andrea and the rest of the staff at H-GAC are a terrific clearinghouse of this type of data. As an agency, they connect all of us in what we have the ability to do for our public. And that's not just in times of pandemic, it's times outside. It's roles of parks and natural areas for this subcommittee and average times. So just like we've all read as being a part of this subcommittee or a part of this round for H-GAC, our normal role with this subcommittee is protecting and preserving parks and natural areas across the region. Well, you can't do much more to protect and preserve the park than to do the same with its user groups. So that's what we're trying to do here. So that's in an average day of what your Parks and Natural Area subcommittee might do within a park that's essential to enhancing that community and keeping it strong and healthy. A pandemic comes and it upsets the apple cart. It doesn't do the same things we do every day. So what complications arise within our park system during that? One of the leading problems that as agencies we're facing right now with this pandemic is a fight between popular opinion and facts. It seems an odd fight, but it is. We're met often with, I'm a born and raised Texan, and so I know for a fact, because I personally can be obstinate about some things, but we don't like to be told what to do. And I think to an extent that's very true with the nation. In the midst of a pandemic, this is one of the most important times that we would listen to those that have a stronger skill set or a wider ability to learn about these prevailing facts. So popular opinion is at war or at odds occasionally with facts, but also it's important to remember that facts are a bit of a kryptonite to a popular opinion. Another complication, you're forced to often form alliances. Who are you going to hitch your wagon to, so to speak? What we have found is that if you can find politically neutral and just fact-based organizations and ally with those organizations, and through the ups and downs, you're basing your decisions on something consistent, there's a greater public perception of that. An example of that is the city of Pearland has chosen to ally a lot of our data and modeling sets with the Institute of Health and Health Metrics, and the E is escaping me now, but the University of Washington, the IHME, that has been a reliable agency. There have been a couple faux pas in their delivery, but they've been very transparent about that, how they were wrong and how they've corrected it. So I think even through their mistakes, they've lent greater credibility to their own program. So you also have some unique opportunities during the time of pandemic. Earlier, I mentioned having some of your local sanitizing agencies come and join you. What we found during the pandemic were not only did we have local firms that did this, these local firms wanted to keep their community safe, and we were able to recruit and solicit 2 firms at no cost to, for some time, sanitize playgrounds before we realized the full extent of the capacity and capability of the virus. So look towards different types of Good Samaritans in your agency. That might be donations of personal protective equipment. We have found that through our Active Adult Center, the NAP Activity Center, we had many members that were at home now and looked for something to do, and were more than happy to sew masks. So we actually formed a relationship of being able to provide some of the resources and utilize that talent that they were so eager to provide to their own community and give back cloth face coverings to some of the positions within our agency that didn't have a greater demand for something medical grade. So what can those others do for you? Keep an eye out for that, and keep in mind that sometimes just because it has a cost, your organization may not bear a cost for that. There is a vast array of stimulus funds available for everything from small sole proprietorships up to very, very large corporations, and government and quasi-government is included in that as well. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that, because sometimes doing the right thing isn't cheap, but it's still the right thing. So if you can leverage some of these federal funds to make that happen, that's better for you and better for your organization and community. So mitigating hazard, how do you do that? How do you combat something that we don't really know? Well, the first is going to be to form a constituency that agrees with you that there is a problem. Right now, the largest barrier to everyone agreeing that we are in the midst of a problem is just perception. So we're in a bit of a dilemma, whereas democracy and an overload of orders, they don't coexist very well. There's not a very symbiotic relationship between those two things. So we need to make sure that those that we're asking to step outside of what is ordained through their birth in this country or immigration to this country, a sense of freedom, how do we make sure that people understand that we need to temporarily rely on them to amend that a bit to keep us all safer? So a helpful tool in doing that is designating a particular communication outlet or person. If you're an agency that has one person that can be spared to dedicate their entire efforts to this, that is the best. That's not likely in all organizations though. So the next best thing to do is making sure that everyone's equipped with the same information of general knowledge sharing, so that when a message goes out either through a social media platform, through a call with a colleague, or just general sharing as we do in and out of our places of employment or service. Something that is very important to do though is you'll often find that when you make a decision, the more controversial it is, the more interest it will drum up from media and the like. So it's important early on to decide who is authorized to share the plans of your agency and to what extent. It's not a lock and key scenario. It's just an appropriate routing to make sure that the message is shared in context and appropriately. It saves hours of damage control down the road. What I've also found and strongly encourage against is sharing opinions. Opinions are very dangerous to share. And if there's something more dangerous than sharing them, I think it's using them as justification. An opinion is not of any value in a medically consequential situation, which is what a pandemic is. So it's paramount that you garner universal trust. I would encourage you to make only non-political, fact-driven decisions and share that with your community, your patrons, whatever your user group may be. So when you have to make these changes that may garner attention, consider the fact that when you adapt this policy, does it have to happen immediately, or do you have an opportunity to allow things to simmer, to evolve this new policy? So an example would be an area that you have available for service and you perhaps see an uptick in case counts for your region, our region. Do you have the ability to put out the notice that says, unless we see a cessation in decrease in case counts, our facility will be restricting access or will require masks or will reduce the number in each party allowed on site during this period at X date? Many times you will have that opportunity, and making a decision early on allows you a much greater opportunity to allow your user group to find something alternative, similar, or ask you for, and maybe give you an idea that you hadn't considered. Something else that's important during all of this within your sanitization is knowing your science. So there has been, much like you become painfully aware of the number of roof contractors after a hurricane, it's amazing the number of people that sell hand sanitizer and soap right now, particularly when the pandemic initially began and washing your hands was the top of the list of things to do. Many sales representatives were trying to enlist a more expensive product because it's what you needed as an antibacterial product to eliminate the dangers of COVID-19 within your facility. If you knew your science, which really is no more than logging on to cdc.gov/coronavirus, you would understand that COVID-19 is caused by SARS-CoV-2, a virus. So this much more expensive product as an antibacterial soap has no additional effect on your ability to help your user group operate and visit more safely. So knowing a little bit about what you're fighting could help you win the fight much easier. Another piece of knowing the science about what you're dealing with, are you wasting countless hours of staff time by wiping down surfaces with a product that doesn't work while all along leaving anything over hand's reach untouched? Well, now as we evolve and know more and more about the virus, we are on a precipice of understanding that droplet transmission may no longer be the only means of the virus spreading. So is your firm currently exercising or able to maybe provide a vapor sterilization? These are the kinds of calls that you can make ahead of time. And if they're not, they typically can subcontract someone that can. And in the midst of all of these things, again, as you're looking at these things thinking our organization is a nonprofit or a government agency and budgets don't abound, this is where the CARES Act and some of the other funding opportunities come about. A fantastic resource to learn what government and quasi-governmental agencies and nonprofits, what their abilities are within these acts, is the Texas Municipal League, TML. I would strongly advise any of you that aren't very familiar with that, perhaps outside of the government realm, to take a look at these guys. They have staff dedicated to just making the jobs of folks that do what we do easier and our service delivery safer and better. So the million-dollar question, hey, this is great that I know what to do, but what if no one wants to listen? We have seen many folks doing what they refer to as the First Amendment audit, collecting videotape of you as an agency, forcing them to do something that they interpret that they're not required to do. So you might ask yourself, can I even close my park? Can I even force someone to wear a face mask? Can anyone? Can government? Well, the short answer is it depends. What we found in the situation preceding our most recent executive order was that there were no teeth in the executive order, because the very last sentence of it ensured all Texans that no one could be detained, arrested, or cited for not following them. They were just what we needed to all stay safe. A bit of an oxymoron as an order, but nonetheless, it's what we had to work within. But I think it's important that we take a look in what we have as a state. So it was put very well by the one of the associate district attorneys in Madison County up north. So what he shared to some of his folks that asked, well, can we even force someone to do something in our facility, in our business, on our park, in our conservancy? And the short answer was, yes, you can absolutely do that. So all organizations, I'm starting a quote from him, all organizations have the right to refuse service so long as it doesn't violate anything of a protected class. And my favorite part, he goes on to say, you can't refuse to serve me because I'm half Italian and half Irish, but you can refuse to serve me because I'm being an idiot. His words, not mine, in the latter there, but you can see there's a nice analog there for those not choosing to maintain compliance with some of your orders that you're being either asked or choosing to enact to keep your constituency safe. We're getting some of to go back to a Texas reference, some of the don't tread on me type mindsets, and that feel that there's a constitutional right not to wear a mask. Is that true? No, it absolutely isn't. Government has the right to regulate in the name of safety. So under the US Constitution's 10th Amendment and countless Supreme Court decisions that were made over nearly 200 years, state governments have primacy to control the spread of dangerous disease. And we're seeing that get there with Governor Abbott. We now see in the latest executive order, we are allowed to have some type of a punitive recourse to not wearing masks in public areas. In your first instance, it is a warning, but after this, we are allowed to start issuing citations. And I think that that nexus between expectation and consequence had to be made. And I really applaud the governor's office for getting to that point. Some argue about the preemptive doctrine because of the Opening America Again plan from the White House. There's a supremacy clause that came out of the Supreme Court some time ago, and that's being referred to often saying, well, the federal government's not forcing me, so the state can't force me. That's not the nuance of what's happening, so that makes that nuance not applicable. The federal government's not saying you can't be punished for it, they're just not saying you must be. So what Governor Abbott did was filled in that gap and saying, I'm authorizing consequences. So I think throughout this pandemic, as with anything that I have come before me, I always try to find some type of an opportunity within it. And I think during the pandemic, you have a real opportunity to show your guests, patrons, citizens, your service market, who and what you are and how you communicate that as an entity. So I think you do that through effective communication and relationship building. And the latter of those two things cannot be built more strongly than through honest and candid dialogue. So I would encourage you to take advantage of any opportunity to inform your guests or constituency that you have and proceed in that manner. I believe that now I have reached the end of my presentation. And a lot of times when we're in situations, we don't ask questions because they're dumb or we don't want to hear about them. In this pandemic, everyone's situation is unique. Your situation is unique, so your question is valuable. If I have the ability to, I would be happy to answer it. If not, any way to connect with me that I have is listed below, as well as some of the resources that I've shared with Andrea to share with all of us. So I thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Andrea, on behalf of H-GAC, and thank you, Glenn, for inviting me as the chair of the committee.
So we do have a little time for questions. If anyone has any questions. Oh, I see Tracy Timpanero already has her hand up. Let me unmute you.
Thank you, Andrea. I have a question about outdoor benches for seating. Are you cleaning those, and what products are you using? And I wish to God there could be a natural product used in these situations.
Well, do I have something for you then? There is a company that is based in Sugar Land. My colleague, Mr. Chesser, in that area may be aware of them, but they produce a natural product, hypochlorous acid. If you know anything about immunoresponse, it's what our white blood cells produce in our body to keep us safe during, as any type of disease is coming at us. And the product goes by the trade name EnviroCleanse. It is approved. It has EPA and FDA clearance to neutralize COVID-19. It's safe on every type of surface. Essentially what it is, many things that we find have been working tremendously effectively and the best of anything in the realm in nature. It just took us a bit to discover that one. So it's when you think about the sanitizing abilities and power of bleach, what they've done with hypochlorous acid is they've been able to isolate and neutralize the sodium within it, the salts within it, and pull those out. So this stuff can actually be used in one of their pieces of marketing. They're actually using it to clean a child's hands while they have mess all over. But its ability to sanitize and just flat out clean as a degreaser and everything of that nature is tremendous. I have no permission from the agency, or we don't get anything from them, but I would personally advocate for that product.
Sounds great to me.
I have a couple of questions in the question box. One of them is the name of the company and the product again. Chris,
yeah, absolutely. So it goes by the trade. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I
No.
keep interrupting you. Just answer. I'm sorry.
Okay. It goes by the trade name EnviroCleanse, one word. The name of the company I can't think of. They're in Sugarland. I'm sure if you type it into your favorite search engine, EnviroCleanse, Sugarland, you would find it. Something that's really interesting, and this may be why I don't have a relationship with them. If you start looking on the internet, once they figured out, I guess, the process to it, obviously their product and name and bottle is proprietary, but the process to get to that end result of a solution is not. So they're actually, if you would like to go a step further and create less waste during the process of making and acquiring this product, you can buy, it's a kit, I think it's about $60, and it comes with glass spray bottles. If you're doing this on a small scale, it comes with glass spray bottles and recyclable small vials of reagent that you would mix just with any type of water, and it uses a form of electrolysis through the device, and you can manufacture hypochlorous acid with this small device. The $59.99 is for an at-home type size or small agency, maybe a conservancy office, but they do offer all the way up to a large-scale commercial endeavor size product. So EnviroCleanse, if you want to buy it already made, take a look around if your agency needs to save a little money online, and you can actually make it yourself.
We did have another question in the question box, and I just want to let everyone know that the slides from today's presentations, as well as the resources Dr. Orlia mentioned earlier, will be available on H-GAC's website. Not right now, but once I am able to upload them, I will send everyone a link so that you can easily get to those. And I see Joe Cheshire has his hand up. Let me unmute you.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for the plug for our company here in general. Can y'all hear me?
It's a little staticky, but yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I was just curious if you guys in Pearland are having leagues that are hosting tournaments.
We have leagues that want to host tournaments. We took the stance, and I made the unpopular decision that right now there's allowances under the governor's orders to have youth sporting events collect a larger crowd, but then there was not an allowance for special events based on tons of science from the CDC, and I couldn't figure out where there wasn't a good for goose, good for gander scenario happening there. So if the science was telling us that a special event mass gathering wasn't safe, I chose to make that universal. So we have canceled those. And I'll tell you that a step further, after sharing the rationale behind why we did that, 2 of the youth sports leagues have actually made the decision to cease their practices and everything as well.
Okay. Thanks. It was very gray in the governor's orders, and we've kind of taken the opposite kind of interpretation of it, but we didn't feel like we could keep it from occurring. So thanks for your input.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Andrea, I have all of this. I know I took up more time than I should have. If anyone continues to come into the box, just as Ashley mentioned earlier, I'm kind of glued to my computer these days, and I'm happy to take calls or emails offline afterwards. If as an apology for my going over, I could let Mr. Laird reclaim some of his time to share the pieces he needs to of his agenda.
Okay, like I was telling Ashley, it is kind of awkward when we're waiting, and I'm sure people may have questions. So yeah, just feel free to reach out to me or directly to Chris with your questions, and we will get on with the show, and I'll turn it back over to, I want to say Mr. Laird, to Glenn Laird.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Or is that Dr. Chris? Oh, whatever. Okay, what we want to move on to now in the agenda is the P&A awards and recognition. And just to go over very quickly where we stand sort of on the timeline. We're at the point, as you can see at the very top of this, where we're going to go over the application, and we're getting into the selecting judges as well, and that hopefully we'll have them all lined up before the end of July or somewhere in August. Maybe deep into September before we do, but the judging will start in early October. The applications will open up at the beginning of September and run for the whole month. And so we're expecting, as you can see, to move forward with the judging in the first half of October, and then bring that back by way of email to everybody in the roundtable to look over those recommendations and provide comment, suggestions, etc. Then in early November, we will go to the Natural Resources Advisory Committee for the acceptance of the awards, and we'll thereafter, about the middle of December and on to the end of that, be notifying the winners with the recognition event late January, early February time frame. So that's kind of where we stand, what we've got to go through yet. And of course, the big thing here now is going to be looking at the application itself, and you have available a Word document that had the that particular little document. I forget how many pages. I got it in front of me here. I think it's about 6 or 7 pages. And if you're able to look at it, I'm going to highlight things because I had a previous commitment that I need to scoot out of here for, and sort of unfortunately drop this back in Andrea's lap to finish everything out. There's been a lot of back and forth between myself and the staff and people involved in the roundtable on the potential of a couple of changes that we're putting forward here. And if you are able to look at your Word document, you'll see on the first page, we're looking to add things that weren't very specific before, but we think these metrics are going to help in future, and that's the size of the project in whatever way you want to. If it's a trail, how long is it? If it's a park, acres, or a natural area, acres. And then the value of the project, because, of course, we have 2 categories specific to up to $500,000 and above $500,000 on the ground finished projects to get not just what your range is, but what was the final, when all the dust settled, your cost to put this facility in service. And we would like to add those, and in fact, staff is going back to, is planning on going back to, if they haven't started already, of going back to previous winners to see if we can mine that information from them, and then to have a better idea of the impact of everything that's associated with these awards over the years. So that's one thing that we're putting forward. The other is there's been discussion about improving the resiliency and sustainability for the area through this project. These are 2 words that have really been getting a lot of play of late. And I think everybody will agree that Harvey and a lot of other things since then has brought this very much to the fore. And so if you go a little deeper into the application, I think it's like on page 4 and 5, because it's 5 pages. You'll see what we have had in terms of the questions being asked, and then the scores associated with those. And now inserting into this new question on describe how the project improves or will improve the resiliency and sustainability for the area. And the question before the House, and we may or may not have time to have in the format we're having to operate in to get into an open forum here, but we would certainly, anybody that wants to weigh on this could do so through sending emails, text messages, whatever, to the staff, to Andrea, and so that we can get an idea of which way to go with this. We've got, I've noticed that we have just above where we've inserted this, we have 4 questions that we have weighted as 15 each. And this is all has been out of a total of 100. The question is, do we want to keep it at 100 for convenience sake in calculating? Or are we willing to come up with a number for this one and tag it on to the 100? Or do we want to maybe borrow a few points here and there from some of the other big ones to give this what everybody thinks ought to be its appropriate place within what we're trying to measure? And like I said, I had a previous commitment, and I've got to actually kind of scoot out of here right now. But I wanted to give you what it is that we need to have a discussion on, so that we will end up with a final questionnaire to go with the applications, and time to go ahead and be ready for that. And then, of course, whatever discussion comes out, we will be sending out to the entire Roundtable constituency what it is that we are now looking to actually put it out there, get one more round of comment, and then we're going to go. And so, Andrea, if it's okay with you and with everybody else, I'm going to exit stage right and let y'all continue on with it, because I know you'll do a good job.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. I hope you have a good rest of your day. It's not necessarily ideal for a conversation during a webinar, but if anybody wants to type any of their notes in the question box about your feelings on this, or if you want to email me maybe by the end of this week so we can aggregate it, because we do have to get going on this and get our data services staff to build our application online. You can type your questions here, or you can email me. And I do want to move on to the next point, though, that I hope to get some feedback from, and it's for the judges for the Parks Awards. And every year our judges represent the academic community, a consultant, a past winner, a water quality expert, and just a wild card judge who's a really good judge that doesn't fit in one of the other 4 categories. So I hope that you could give some thought to who might make a good judge, or maybe you'd make a good judge and you want to raise your hand and be a judge for this. But send me an email and let me know who you think might be a good judge, or put it in the chat box right now if you know somebody. And with that, I guess you can raise your hand if you want to talk about this or the other, about the additional question and the scoring. If you want to raise your hand or type in the question box right now, you can. Or we could go ahead. Okay, Frank Weary, you have a question?
Comment, the question was whether or not we ought to pull points away from some of the other items. My position would be, don't worry about making it be 100 points total. Let the total be whatever it wants to be, and let the point count for each item reflect its relative importance.
Thank you. I was also hoping you were raising your hand to be a judge, but I will talk to you about that offline. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Hearing. Thank you, Mr. Heppen. Anyone else? Okay, I think that we could go ahead and try to do a roundtable. I can unmute you one at a time if you want to let us know what's going to go on. And the only way I know how is just alphabetically in my list. So the first person is Ashley De Leon Torres. Okay, Becky Martinez. Bethany Earl. Brian Moran. So I am trying to unmute you. I don't know if you're unable to mute yourselves. I know Ms. Martinez said that she said something, but I didn't hear her, so I don't know if anyone else could. So I may just be calling names and not being able to hear anyone. So I'll go to someone I could hear earlier. Dan Kalinsky.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. I just wanted, first and foremost, I want to thank both of our speakers for their presentations today. And Andrea, as always, thank you for organizing this. That was very, very informative, and got some great points here from both the speakers. So as far as what's going on in Alvin, I just wanted to kind of let y'all know we're doing our finishing up our preliminary design for our Phase 3 hike and bike trail. Our consultant, Kinley Horn, is doing a fantastic job. We also have our stakeholders, which are 3 different developments around formerly owned city property that was purchased and being developed into a couple of different neighborhoods. So we're pretty excited about getting this preliminary design finished. We're doing preliminary only because the area that this trail is going through is right on top of a wastewater line that has to be replaced. And so we can't do anything until that gets done. And that's an 18-month project in and of itself. So we're collaborating with our engineering department, our wastewater department, and we're getting this preliminary design finished. And then we'll hope to step into a full design once we know a little more about when this project's going to get kicked off and the wastewater project is going to get kicked off and then completed. But that's what's going on here. We're just trying to weather the storm with this pandemic, continuing to engage our public. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Eric Heppen.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you all. We are actually still quite busy. We're wrapping up one of our newest parks up off of Grant Road. It's called Grantwood Park. We're hoping to open sometime in the next month, depending on where everything is with the pandemic. We've been working hard on that on and off since Harvey. That area got pretty hit hard with Harvey. In addition, we just finished a new section of our Mason Creek Trail, and we extended about another 1.5 miles. Lastly, we just finished another 2 phases of excavation at our John Paul Landing Park. It was a 9-acre cell and another 25-acre cell. So that's pretty substantial. So that added over 200 acre-feet of storage to our lake.
Hey, thank you. Casey Collins.
Good afternoon. This is Casey with Half Associates. I'm pleased to report that we just finished up a new park in Atascocita called Atascocita Park. I believe it's open to the public. If you guys get a shot, I strongly recommend to go check it out. Additionally, we're moving forward with 2 additional phases of Mercer Botanic Gardens. And so we're excited for that project as well. Our firm is still remaining strong with work, which is always great, and continue to work remote. So looking forward to finally getting back to some type of normal, and look forward to seeing the crew hopefully maybe next month. Thanks.
Thank you. Lin Du.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Feng Du. I'm the Parks Development Manager for City of Sugarland. We have been quite busy during the pandemic. We have been working with the Collin Park Conservancy on the Collin Park Phase 2, which will include about 1.2 miles of trails and nature play area. So the conceptual design is just completed. Depending on the funding, we will move on to the construction documentation of the trails, the Phase 2 trails. The other thing we are very excited about is we have finished we're going to start the construction of a road connection. It's a 1-mile road connection between our Reservoir Park and the Memorial Park. Both of the 2 parks are in the Reservoir floodplain corridor and very popular. So connecting those parks together will, create more trail, hiking and biking opportunities for the residents. Of course, it's going to make the vehicular access much easier during the events. So that's a project we have always been looking forward to finish. We are also planning to install a restroom at our Mayfield Park, based on the needs of the community. Part of it is a little bit kind of abnormal, is we are actually working on the Highway 59 landscaping design project for Public Works Department because of the limited resources we have. Other than that, we continue with our Reservoir Corridor Master Plan update, and we are preparing for a senior center study project. So that's pretty much what we're working on right now in terms of the parks development.
Thank you. Frank Weary.
Yes, for Exploration Green, we continue to have throughout the pandemic. We've worked on continuing construction. Phase 3A is nearing completion for the trail. It's about 95% complete. Outlook probably October for opening that section. Unfortunately, we had to shut down part of phase 2 for some remediation of sand that was washing into the lake and filling it up. We're about a week or two from finishing that up, and the contractor who is doing that work will immediately roll over and start working on phase 4 construction. And then looks like we'll make our plan to finish up phase 5 and 3B next year sometime. So good progress.
Hi, thank you. Gina Magana? Jim Robertson? Lisa Marshall? Michael Burku?
Nothing this month. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Shen?
Yes, so with Interstate Mud, we have our Rick Rice Park. And I believe, Tracy, if you're still on the phone, you can probably add what I'm not saying. But we continue to offer the hike and bike trail for the public. And we do have on our website a new family fun section that offers ideas for games and activities for families and to encourage outdoor times. We do try to have ample securities to ensure safety environment for the public. Some of the public outreach we've done currently are with the Boy Scouts, where they were installing signs that related to the monarch butterfly way stations. So we're trying to make our parks accessible to the public during this time when everybody is at home, and trying to encourage everybody to come out. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Robertson, can you unmute yourself? Or you can share your comment in the question box if the unmuting isn't working. Rebecca Luman? Rebecca, I can see that your mic is on, but we can't hear you. Hey, Tracy?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, just to add to what Michelle said, Rick Rice Park in Katy, Texas, we're 8.5 acres. We added a family fun section to the website, as she mentioned, and we put some scavenger hunt sheets on there for kids to use when they come to the park, and those have been very popular. We're also working at redoing some of our signage since the park has been there a while. Some of it is looking a little bit weary. And we are hopeful that we can host you guys in the fall for the field trip that H-GAC hosts every fall. So that's it.
I hope we can have our field trip in the fall too. So if we're allowed to go anywhere, then we will definitely work on planning that. Did I miss anybody? that wanted to say anything? We have some muting and unmuting. Raise your hand or unmute yourself if you wanted to say anything.
Andrea, there's a question in the chat box from Ashley De Leon Torres. She said it's her first time attending H-GAC Roundtable, and what are some other ways to become involved?
Sure, the roundtable meets every other month, and then in the spring and in the fall, when we're able to, we do go on field trips. And a way to be involved is we do reach out to each other, and we can talk about what we're doing with our parks, and we share like grant opportunities and things like that. And HGSE has a lot of other opportunities for being involved with parks and with other programs. So if you want, I can send you an email about where we can get you connected with some additional resources. Tracy, are you still muted?
No.
Okay.
I forgot to mention that I know we're governed by different rules than other parks because we're a MUD, but just to let everyone know, we've kept the park open throughout the pandemic, and we are following the Harris County rule of no more than 10 people gathering at the park in terms of the classes we hold at the park, the boot camps, Zumba, and yoga. So just wanted to let everyone know that those were our decisions on those issues.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, we may be in a situation where we're at a meeting that actually ends early. So I think with that, I will end this webinar. It's a reminder that all of the slides and the resources that were mentioned today will be available online. You'll get a link from me later. And if you have any feedback about the question on the application or some idea of people who might make great judges, please send them my way. You have my email address, or you definitely will after I send out the link. And so with that, I like to say goodbye to everybody and hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.